I've seen more tears fall from your eyes than all the showers of April.
Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Andrea Lissoni. I'm Artistic Director of the Haus der Kunst in München, where we are broadcasting from. It's my enormous pleasure to share with all of you, our audience, our public, the event about to begin. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation between Yvonne Adhiambo Ovor and Michael Armitage that happens in the occasion of Michael Armitage's show Paradise Edict at the Haus der Kunst. I'm sure you could enjoy this somehow this entrance in the imaginary of Michael Armitage, what you will see or what we will have encountered when if you came to the Haus der Kunst. But what you don't necessarily know is that the sound, the music that you had is a playlist that was specially conceived by Michael, and that is a beautiful journey within his imaginary that he will perhaps speak about later. So our dear public, I would like also to inform you that the event is going to be recorded, although this is not affecting you in any way. But most importantly, what can affect you is the possibility, the opportunity for you to ask questions. So in the chat, you can share questions. And at the end of the dialogue between Yvonne and Michael, we will be doing our best for them to answer your questions. So please try to interact. It's going to be for sure exciting. Last but not least, I would like to thank everyone who made this event possible. So Nasrin Lehai from Michael Armitage Studio, actually his studio manager, and then at the Haus der Kunst, Alexander Reiser, Andreas Saul, Dirk Frey, and last but not least, my dear colleague, the creator of the show, Anna Schneider, who made a wonderful exception, broke her maternity leave time to be with us, to introduce the two discussants, and also to drive you throughout this exhibition and to the many trails the exhibition features. So thank you so much. And I hand over to Anna.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your generous introduction. Hello and welcome to everybody to this conversation between Michael Armitage and Yvonne Adhiambo Ovor, which, as Andrea already said, takes place on the occasion of the exhibition Paradise Edict at Haus der Kunst. Although, of course, we would have wished to welcome you all physically to Haus der Kunst tonight, we are nonetheless extremely grateful to be able to broadcast this event so that you can all join from wherever you are tonight.
Vision Paradise Edict, and I think we will see some slides while I try to give you a little bit of an introduction to what the exhibition looks like. The exhibition Paradise Edict here at Haus der Kunst is up to date the most comprehensive institutional exhibition by the Kenyan British artist Michael Armitage. It brings together different bodies of works from the artist's multifaceted practice and engages with the engages the different subjects that are kind of embedded in his work and that are evoked in his dense and really vibrantly colored and multi-layered paintings. Raised in Kenya and trained at the Slade School of Fine Art and the Royal Academy of Arts in London, Armitage's practice is equally influenced by the imagery and thinking of contemporary East African art, as well as by Western painting traditions. He draws inspiration from political events, pop culture, folklore, and personal memories, weaving these into mythically charged and timeless pictures. A special characteristic of Michael Armitage's practice is the support material he uses. He paints on so-called lubugu, a textile traditionally made in southern Uganda from the bark of the ficus tree. Michael Armitage makes use of the irregularities and the seams of this organic material by incorporating them into his compositions of his paintings. He thereby roots his practice into the cultural context of East Africa. Traditionally, lubugu was used in coronation and healing rituals, as well as a burial shroud. The galleries, which you've seen a couple of images already, in which the exhibition Paradise Edict unfolds, are organized in thematic chapters, in which European iconography and genres and the depiction of a Kenyan past and presence converge. The thematic structure engages first, and in the first room as an entrance, with animals and the limits of the human. Second, with landscape and the exploration of forms of nature, places, and histories. Third, with figures and the precariousness of the human existence. And fourth, with the political group portrait in a series that developed around the contested parliamentary elections in Kenya in 2017. The multiple visual references that Armitage merges into a virtuous visual language equally invite and challenge the viewer. It is therefore particularly exciting that we get to explore some of his inspirations and studies in the following room, in a small study room. Here, we are allowed to have an insight into his thought process as well into the kind of material making of his painterly surface. And the following room is the last room of the exhibition, which bears the title Mvili Akili na Roho. I hope I pronounced it correctly, which translates into body, mind, and soul from Swahili. The gallery is dedicated to 6 contemporary East African painters, each of whom deeply informed Michael Armitage's visual language and self-understanding as an artist. This first-time contextualization of Michael Armitage's practice with rarely seen paintings by Jack Katarikawe, Seine Wadu, Mick Gichugu, Eli Munjao, Asap Makua, and Teresa Musoke, all key figures of the vibrant East African art scene between 1970s and 1990s, also resonates with Armitage's long-term vision, which is the historical reappraisal of the contemporary East African art in the country of his birth. A vision that he's actively seeking to push with his recently founded art institution, the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute. In this sense, I am delighted to open up yet another dialogical and inspirational connection and warmly welcome the distinguished writer Yvonne Adhiambo Ovua. Not only they both not only share a friendship, but also a similar dense, evocative, and palimpsest-like language, albeit of course in their respective medium. They deal with Kenyan history, colonial repercussions, and the challenges of social transformation and the globalized reality of the countries of their birth. Yvonne Adhiambo Ovua is an award-winning writer with a wide-ranging oeuvre. In 2003, she won the prestigious Kane Prize for African Writing for her short story, Weight of Whispers. And her debut novel, Dust, published in 2015, won the Jomo Kenyatta Prize for Literature and was shortlisted for the Folio Prize. The generational novel, Dust, which evolves around the fate of a Kenyan family, finds a relentless and at the same time poetic and highly symbolic language to speak about the collective wounds of the colonial past and a possible future within contemporary Kenya. Like a poetic investigation, the narrative traces the continuities between these recent political events and traumatic chapters of Kenya's colonial history, such as the violent suppression of the Mau Mau uprising by the British in the 1950s. Similar to Armitage election rally series that we see for the first time fully exhibited together in one room, the controversial presidential elections in this time from 2007, accompanied by weeks of violent uprisings form the breathless starting point of the story, the novel Dust. Yvonne Adjambo-Ovwo's most recent novel, The Dragonfly Sea, from 2019, looks at another complex scenario through a Kenyan lens. Laid out as a coming-of-age story and situated on the fringes of Kenya and the island Pate, the novel is dedicated to the effects of globalization on Kenyan society. Yvonne Adjambo-Ovwo's writing is not new to German readers. Both of her captivating novels have been recently translated into German, and I have them with me. Dust is here, I can hold them up. Dust is known as Der Ort, an dem die Reise endet, and The Dragonfly Sea is translated into Das Meer der Libellen. From 2018 to 2019, Yvonne Adjambo-Ovwo was a fellow at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, and currently she is the recipient of the DAAD Artists in Berlin program. Without further ado now, I would like to hand over to Michael and Yvonne, who are with us from Kenya tonight. And maybe I would like to start with a question to Michael, because as there's such interesting kind of connections between Yvonne's language and your paintings, and it feels really very, very connected in a way. I was wondering whether in what way, or if literature at all plays a role for you in your as a source of inspiration, because that's actually a fact that we haven't covered in a way in the exhibition itself, whether there are literary resources or sources that you use, and if Yvonne is one of those, and how these play into your work in a way.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Andrea, and everyone at Haus der Kunst for hosting this. And a huge, particularly big thank you to Yvonne, who is one of my influences. And I'm really, really excited that you were up for doing this. Thank you. But to answer your question, Anna, yes, very much so. You know, I think for me, one of the points that I was most struck when I first read Dust, as that was the first of Yvonne's writing that I had come across, was basically the landscape. You know, I hadn't really come across any writing that so vividly placed me within an environment that I felt was so familiar. I felt like the scenes were places that I didn't have to imagine, that were already within my own imagination, and that the book kind of existed within me, which is quite an unusual thing, really, especially coming from home. There weren't that many times that I had come across also such extraordinary writing that really placed me within my own head like that. Usually it would involve, which I also enjoy doing, but involve a foreign landscape of some sort. But I was really kind of totally taken unawares by how powerful that was actually. And it also made me think about other people that do read about familiar places to them the whole time. But it's also something I would love to ask you, Yvonne, about is about writing and the point at which, if you ever felt like, you know, there were all these untold stories that you felt needed to be told, because that certainly, there's something about Dust that feels like that.
Well, before I answer that, like you, let me express my gratitude to the Haus der Kunst, Anna and everybody else for making this possible. And it's such a joy meeting you like this, Michael. I wish the virus season had not prevented kind of, you know, a tangible encounter. To your question, I'm overwhelmed by the sense of what longs to be told and what passes through me as the artist, not necessarily because I'm looking for it. Our country, our region, our worlds, certainly the ones we share, Michael, are laden with and weighted down by a deluge of stories that remain untold, unspoken, and unheard. So I feel an aspect of that, of the urgency that of telling that which comes to me. I'm not very disciplined in terms of delivery and production. I wish there was a button I could press in my head to generate the flow. But yeah, yeah. The urgency, I feel it, and I you step out of the door and run into a story that's unique, distinct, and portrays a dimension of being and living and belonging that maybe I have not encountered, or what is not out there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is something that I feel is and that I kept thinking, like, I can't quite believe some of these stories don't exist already in in culture and aren't accessible like that. There's something in the kind of mundane of people's lives that is often epic, like the struggle and what happens is often epic. And like for me, there's something again that's so close to maybe what we try and do if you are trying to tell a story of some sort, where life kind of presents itself as that continually, like both of these sides. And I think again that's something which I'm always completely blown away by with your writing. And there's something in how every single sentence that you craft can be dwelt upon, like there's so much like that. And again, that was something, like, it took me ages to read Dust, like absolutely ages. I kept having to go back and go through it, and and to be honest, it's the same. It takes me much longer to read any of your articles, or just because I love being able to sit with each sentence.
Well, I wonder if it's a mutual admiration society. I know that I stand before your paintings and images, and it's not possible to walk past your own art, Michael, and that's what particularly drew me to your work, without even being aware of where you were from. I first encountered your work before I looked up and said, and you speak about the familiarity, resonance, a depth, as if there's something, as if somebody has painted something that lurks in the deepest part of one's own soul. Then I started. That's when I just saw the Kenya part, not the Kenya British part. I said, okay, I understand. And one of the things I particularly love is your depiction of the ordinary heroic. And I had not, I mean, you know, like for example, the Mkokoteni man, or the chicken thief. But actually, I'll focus on the Mkokoteni man. Coming from Nairobi, we encounter the men pulling the carts, carrying houses, carrying cows, carrying whatever on these carts. And they seem to be a composite, a composite. Both the cart and the man lose their, that's the chicken thief. Both the cart and the man lose their distinct identities, right? But the idea of the ordinary heroic, I'm curious about the gaze that recognizes that, that runs into that, that finds the heroes in the almost mundane.
I think maybe actually, like, it's an interesting question, and I think maybe kind of easier way for me to try and talk about that is through that series of paintings which Mkokoteni, which is up now, and the Chicken Thief belong to, which are about, kind of came about through going to the last major election rally of the opposition before the 2017, 2018 elections. And that just simply because there was a point where I was there with K24 News, and there was a point at which I realized that the guys who were the visually most striking were all being filmed by the international media. And they were also the guys who, quite frankly, I was also drawn to immediately. And then the local media had no interest in them at all.
Interesting.
And I found that really, there was something quite telling in just the visual presentation of support in itself, you know, that there is a way of telling a story that speaks locally and is maybe more mundane, and would be interested in a different sort of content versus something that's perhaps a bit more, just a bit more of a caricature of the same story, but nonetheless. And I found it interesting that also people play that part, you know, and I find that interesting as a question to oneself about the caricature of oneself versus something much more restrained, or maybe on the surface less interesting, but more conflicted perhaps beneath.
Does that actually inform part of the, I think, the rather than the contradictions, the tensions that make you that emerge then as your work, as your paintings? What are the kind of forces that converge within you, and are they at ease, or are they in constant conflict?
I think constant conflict is pretty accurate. I think. I think whether it's and if anything, if something feels at ease, whether it's an image or a narrative, I feel like there's something that I'm missing, that's not quite, it's not quite there. And generally I would say if there's an image that becomes a painting, it's because there's a challenge presented to me in some way, you know, some way of kind of bringing things together like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And in that sense, sorry, you were saying?
No, not me. I think there's a feedback.
Delay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
But and in that
Yeah.
sense, you know, yeah, I can hear you. Great. In that sense, of starting with life basically, and starting with an ordinary story, but finding something expanded and true beyond a locality. Again, what one would have to go to like Dragonfly Sea, you know, where again the ocean is almost like this metaphor for connection, for cultural interhybridity. It just exists as this kind of place that I've always thought the ocean is actually remarkably consistent for people and for cultures, in a way that. Do you think not?
No, no. Oh no, I'm surprised. No, I'm trying to figure out consistency, but maybe it's because that comes from my first encounter of the ocean. Its impact was so profound that I think one of the things, my sense of identification with the ocean comes from its inconsistency, its restlessness. It's constantly, you know, changing. It's never quite. Its blue is never quite the blue you think blue should be, for example. Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And there's also something about both the threat and the enabling aspect of it.
Right.
That seems, and I suppose that's what I was thinking more as a consistency in terms of the sort of stories and the sort of place. The ocean always seems like it's something to be respected.
Yes.
And within cultures, it always feels like it kind of has this like both feared and loved element to it, where it sits like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm off on one there.
No, I don't think you are. But there are two questions linked to that since the ocean has shown up in our conversation. A is what are for you the limits and the constraints of the ocean? Does it necessarily end on the seashore or the shore? That's one, and which allows me to segue into the title of this, your first museum exhibition. I'm very proud of you. Congratulations. The Paradise Edict. I'd love to walk through that with you. I was surprised to discover that it's actually located and inspired by an island off the coast of Kenya, Kauai, not so far from Pate Island, where Dragonfly Sea is located. So yes, let's voyage.
Yeah, amazing. Could we put the Paradise Edict up, in fact? Thank you. Yeah, I suppose the strange thing for me is that I found it very difficult to make ocean-facing paintings, but I found it more easy to face away from the ocean and look back towards the land, which in this case is exactly what's happening here. I mean, you would almost have the waves behind you, and then a little bit further back, you would have this sort of the bush and the forest. I was thinking about the Boni forest in particular, up there, and I found it interesting when I was up there, just having read continuously for years about this conflict between the Al-Shabaab and the KDF and various AMISOM forces. And that versus the extraordinary beauty and tranquility of being beside the forest and looking to the land, and seeing that. And then all these ideas around paradise and ideas that have evolved, whether it's, you know, there are a couple of figures in here that are again like a take on from Dante's Inferno of human bellows. The first one that I had seen of that was Hieronymus Bosch doing that, and then Goya. But then I wanted to kind of evolve that within this. And the idea of the land, again, like we were talking about the sea, but of the land and this idea of the sublime being something quite different. Like for me, the landscape at home was never this peaceful, sublime place. For me, I always felt an element of fear within the
Really?
landscape. Yeah.
Ah.
Which
But
yeah.
why? Really? But why? No, no. I think I can. I think I might sense why, but state it. Why?
I think it starts with stories, you know, growing up and being told
Right.
about various things coming out the bushes, various
Yes.
various hidden creatures, all that stuff. And then that building, you know, and then having an awareness that, that something could be behind that bush, whether there is or not, it left me with a kind of an unease and also total awe. And I feel like the two come very close together.
Oh, okay. But again, perhaps why paradise? I know there's a political reference embedded with. I mean, your titling. Again, I'm curious about the correlation between, say, the political rally and this particular piece.
Yeah, with that call of, you know, I'm going to lead you to the promised land. I'm going to lead you to Canaan.
Canaan.
Canaan, exactly. I started thinking, well, if I'm going to take on this series of paintings that deals directly with the people that supported, and in some instances, a kind of caricature of a leader, like a sort of. I should also try and take on what it is that is this point of seduction. And that's where I started thinking about trying to deal with this idea of the promised land and the problems in that, and having this kind of human narrative embedded within the land, and embedded within the idea of paradise, and how conflicted the reality of these places is, was something that again seemed strangely transparent about the call to lead someone to the promised land, you know, or to an image of that. And I know there's the promised land where there's a physical place in the Middle East and all that, but it was more, I was more thinking about a kind of evocation of paradise as opposed to, you know, a more literal place.
There's something of a paradise lost as well, and I think that's probably linked to the histories we share, belonging to this to this land, to this space. An eternally hopeful people whose hopes are constantly broken by those we want to strangely believe in. But that does not destroy the delusion, or is it the illusion of an idyllic Kenya? Does that kind of notion? Do you recognize yourself in that?
100%. Like, I suppose this is the thing for me with someone that's happy to deal with the difficult parts of a culture and a society. It's out of the hope for something better. It's out of an optimism and a love for something that one can be kind of deeply critical, perhaps. It isn't from a place of cynicism.
Oh no, that's the thing. That's our fate. That's our flaw. But that, I think, is also the strength of the privilege of belonging to the worlds that we belong to. You know, there's since you spoke about paradise and seduction, is Baboon there? I'm sure Baboon there. Let's talk a little bit about. I was reading something you mentioned, the trauma, the imagination trauma when you encountered Meek's works, the erotic, it's not quite the hyper. I know the temptation is to use the words to say the hypersexualized, but the capacity to enter into the the realms of individual, societal, familial darknesses. And I use that word darknesses in a kind of a broad way, but particularly the eros, the erotic. You're not afraid to venture into spaces such as that and bring and evoke these with such incredible color, with a rage of color, actually. How did you get there? How do you even go through those particular doors and do so with such aplomb?
I think I honestly think like I owe so much to that painting by Meek, because I don't think if there could be anything that I paint and it would still seem tame next to that. And there are still subjects. Maybe could we also put up the painting by Meek Ishugu called No Erotic Them Say. But it's like with that painting, I mean, there are so many things that I would find difficult to take on in a painting myself. Like I find both in its kind of painted language, which is so raw and graphic and direct and unflinching, and also the written aspect of it, which is this kind of strange Oedipal poem that sits sort of between the woman or the animal's legs. It's difficult to tell which is which. And seeing that at a young age and feeling the challenge of it.
Where were you? Now this is the writer asking. What is the setting? Where were you? What were you doing? How did you get there?
So one of my closest friends' mother is the artist Chilenge Van Rampenberg.
Ah, Chilenge. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so she and you know she has been such an kind of extraordinary figurehead for me, and she really took me under her wing when I was younger, and I spent a lot of time in her studio as well. But this was in their house. Chilenge and her ex-husband Mark had this hanging in their house, and so I used to see it every time I went round, pretty much every weekend that I went round to my friend Rick's house. And like the first time I saw it, I just thought, oh, I mean, it's so horrible, you know. And then I kept looking at it, and I couldn't believe that this would be something that someone would have in their room and in their house. And not only that, it's like the first painting you would see when you walked in the house. It's such an affront.
Incredible, like, yes.
And also having grown up in you know, having a very Christian upbringing, from polite upbringing like that, to see something like this that was a real challenge to any, basically fulfilled all the taboos all at once. And I couldn't really understand how this could exist. And that's, I suppose in a sense, that's what I mean. It really was a trauma to my imagination, where something shifted. Like it was the first time that I'd really seen all of this stuff. I suppose you spend a lot of time learning that this isn't the right thing to do or the right way to be, and then suddenly to see it all like that.
Everything, all the things you're not supposed to do is right there.
Completely. I mean, yeah. There's some, you know, it's even bestiality going on in it. It's so intense that I feel like having a monkey reclining with a few bananas in its crotch is quite tame. You know, like I don't feel like anything I've done comes near this.
Yeah, back to the baboon. I'm going to mention that because I remember when I think you kind of you've got a few apes in your in your repertoire, but I remember you telling me how the first some of the criticism you received initially was around your use of monkeys, of apes, and the other histories that were imposed or projected upon the images, your paintings. But I love the question you put to me at that time: whose monkey is it? How do you, is it something you still have to respond to from time to time? And I think it's such a beautiful subversive way of of questioning that which others impose upon other cultures, other peoples.
Yeah, I think it's always really interesting having a kind of stepping out of one's own culture. And especially where you get things like imagery or language that suddenly takes on a totally new and different meaning. And in the same way, I would say, like with that question over this baboon, I felt like, growing up in Kenya, I would always have been referred to by other people and refer to myself as being half caste or nusu nusu. And
yes.
As soon as I was in the UK and I said that to someone and described myself as half caste, suddenly I was made aware of like all of these issues to do with the word caste.
Yes.
And it complicated something that for me, like, it's never been said in a derogatory way to me. Like, no one's ever meant it like that. But suddenly there was this weight of something that was so familiar and something I had identified as, and had been known as, and I would call anyone that I knew who was the same like that, became this other thing. And I feel like that with the baboon as well, because there is such a there is this other history of othering, people and depicting them like that. I'm always resistant to having to kind of bow down to someone else's history and have my own thoughts dictated by that. I don't buy that. Yeah.
That's why I'm a fanatic of your work. The refusal to enter into the trend, the kind of the imagined universal trend of thought, or the policing of ideas. The assumption that let's say whatever is a hot point in a particular cultural milieu is necessarily supposed to, you're supposed to adopt that particular point of view without an awareness of the extent of one's own history, one's own context, one's own meanings. That makes me a total, I guess it makes me a little bit obsessive about, following whatever it is you're up to. I think the other thing I love is or maybe love is too drastic a word, but the courage of your capacity to work with the shroud, in order to use the shroud, to use the death shroud as a means to convey your witness, your expression, your palettes. Can you talk a little bit about the Lubugo cloth and how you found it, and how did that happen?
I feel with the surface that there's actually very little I can take credit for, where in many ways it kind of the things that have become more and more significant through making paintings repeatedly over a number of years using the same material, I hadn't anticipated them. Like when I started using it, it was from a very utilitarian point of view, where there was this material that I thought, had this conflicted history in it, which was that I found it in a tourist market being sold as this Kenyan trinket, where it was actually made by the Baganda, and it was for them this culturally hugely significant material. But were
you looking for it, or did it more or less find you? Was it one of those serendipitous encounters?
Totally.
Oh, really? Tell us about it. What has happened? What's the event? What is it? Daylight or night? Where were you?
It was in that market opposite Sarit Center.
Oh, the one that's gone now. All
gone market.
All gone.
Once upon a time.
Yeah.
But and I was just showing a friend who was visiting around, and then I saw them as these just placemats They had made placemats with them, and at the time I was
Oh, I
experimenting.
see. I remember them.
Yeah, exactly. And at the time I was experimenting with a lot of different materials, but
Right.
I just couldn't find something that was kind of had the specificity of place that I wanted, but wasn't dominant of what I was putting onto it. So it didn't kind of fetishize itself in that way. And so then when I found this, and eventually I got to using it like a normal canvas, and it was very subtle, like all of the things that I wanted it to were embedded in the material as opposed to being particularly overt.
Yes.
That's when it began to be interesting to me, because I felt like it was kind of like an encounter with a person where you have what's on the surface, you have your assumptions, and as you get to know it, there are more complications. You know, it's like with the material, it had all of this cultural weight and its original function and cultural purpose. But then when it's presented to soak up your tuskers at night, you know, it's totally lost all of that. And it is such an extraordinarily profound usage as a burial shroud for all of these, you know, hugely important ceremonial aspects of life. To then be reduced to this also felt like there was a kind of parallel with other cultural changes that were happening, and this idea of representing your culture for others to consume, and the kind of cultural parodies that come with that felt like there was again a parallel with the life of this material. And so it was kind of at that point that I was interested, and then I hadn't really considered what it was to stretch a skin and then paint a figure, and then, you know, have the skin have sutures and stitches in it, and then have skin painted on top of that. Like, there were so many things about the material itself and what it was that I only kind of found by using it, really.
I'm curious because I'm just listening to your description. Before you enter the processes you need to undertake before you, if you want, the muses allow the forms of the things to emerge. Do you find your way of art, is there an aspect of ritual to it?
Yeah, I actually think that's very, yes. And I feel like the more that I do, you know, I still haven't come to terms and been at ease with the irritating parts of the process, but slowly getting there, you know, like the thumb twiddling bits,
Oh, yes,
the
yes,
ability
the
to
waiting.
find that. Yeah, the waiting.
The waiting.
Oh, God, you know, tedious as ever. But there definitely is something repetitive and ritualistic about the whole thing. And there's something that I also feel is, which I love about the imagination, or certainly about the imagination, the way I experience it, is how based in reality it is. However kind of bizarre something that one could imagine, you will find something more bizarre. I mean, that's a time of cliche. You'll find a more bizarre example in life, but by looking at life, it does allow you to invent, and it gives you this incredible structure. And in a way, that's the one thing which I always feel like I have to remind myself is, you know, always keep going back to what's lived, because that's where all the unexpected stuff happens. And in the same way, do you find your creativity and writing ritualistic like that?
Yes, it is. You know, it starts off with a very good and very strong intention, with kind of definite frameworks. You recognize where this is going, but by the time, you know, but before that, you have to, you know, all the things that you realize you were supposed to do that become very urgent in that particular moment, like, I don't know, paint the house and polish your nails and count the line of ants that are moving from all those things that suddenly become very important before actually getting to the literally for me I call it a dojo, the dojo of the space where one enters into the realm of creation, to the blank page, to wait, to show up, and trust that the muse and the forces related to the moment of art will kindly, acknowledge the fact that you have shown up. You have finally shown up. Yes, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to get into it. But once I'm in, it takes a lot to get out of the experience of creating. Yes.
That's so interesting you say that, because that's actually something that I keep thinking, and I've been dying to ask you, and I never get round to it. But is your process incredibly visual? Because it feels like it is. I feel like you can almost see everything in front of you.
Yes, Michael. Yes, it really is. It's not possible to begin unless I've seen. It's almost as if I have to see the first image and the last image. A lot of the stories so far appear in kind of new landscapes. I will show up by the sea or go to a mountain, and suddenly there is an incredible sense of characters, one has to be careful about saying I hear voices. It's the characters that show up, and this incredible press of a sense of a story, of a narrative, of an arc. Yeah.
And in that sense, like, because I found it an interesting question that you asked me about kind of taking on difficult societal questions and taboos in work. Are there points at which, if the character is a voice that leads you, that you find that they take you into very uncomfortable places?
Yeah, I follow them.
Yeah.
I owe that lesson to my late friend Binyavanga Wainaina, who told me, Yvonne, get the hell out of the way of the story. And censoring story. I'm using the polite version of what he said here. His birthday was 2 days ago. He would have been 50 this year. But anyway, the idea that characters have free will, story has its own arc. My opinions and my political positions don't really matter. I'm a constant beginner before the moment of story. The same vulnerabilities, insecurities. I don't know if you ever feel that way before a new painting, even now. But I've become familiar and comfortable with those uncertainties because they're just part of the process. And I don't know about you, but when I'm trying to censor or judge the character and I want them to go a certain way, my story dries up. It just disappears. Everything dries up and nothing moves until I obey, until I surrender to that particular process or experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. And is there? That's exactly. It's so true. I mean, you can't dictate these things and then expect them to be this full living thing. It'll be flat and hollow.
Yeah.
But in that sense, like, I always think about the tension in a painting and trying to hold and create a sense of tension, whether it's compositional, color, narrative. When you're sort of crafting the story, is that something that you think about in it?
I think everything is contained in the particular moment of the creation. Yeah. I don't necessarily, the mind is not moving in all those directions. It's in the moment, it's in the story, it's in the feeling. of the particular story sense, that story moment. And then afterwards, of course, when it's all done, the editors come in and shape, kill, murder, all the little precious things. And then something comes out at the end of it all. I don't know. Are you attached to your work? Do you feel? Do you go back to your old work? I don't know, Nyayo, for example, and look at it fondly and with meaning. I ask that because once my work is done, once the books are done, my books are like cats. They kind of say, "Don't call us, we'll call you."
I love that. Yeah, once in a while they'll come and throw something up at your desk.
Yeah.
And then leave with their butt in your face.
Leave. Just kind of move on. Don't cling. Don't cling. What about you?
Yeah, I can't live with my work. I don't want to see it once it's done. Like,
really?
yeah, that's it for me. I'm happy for it to go somewhere else, and if it can be useful to someone else, that's fantastic for me.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of my own work like that.
Yes.
And sometimes, I mean, the thing I enjoy about my work is when I learn something through making it, which almost always happens. But I enjoy the process as opposed to what I get at the end. I find looking at my work very uncomfortable, and maybe that's the point at which I feel like my ego gets in the way a bit, because I just see all my faults and problems, and that I wish I could have done better. So maybe a bit more humility needs to come in, but I'm very happy, like you say, like cats, let them go when somebody, when they hear something they want to get towards. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I suppose that also comes from, there was a point at which I was making paintings which I feel like there was less of a consideration of an audience, really. And that's in the concept as opposed to the making, from the beginning, less of an idea that these were things that someone else would engage with. And when I made paintings like that, I felt more closer to them, but that was mainly because they never felt finished.
I see.
But there's something, I think, when I feel like that story's over, I'm happy to leave it. Until then, it's ever present. It's always there.
I know we're supposed to hand over to the Q&A sessions, but I've got one question. Is the anthill there? Is the anthill? If it's there, just tell me. There's a whole story around that. It's your one painting that I go back to even when I'm beginning my own work. It's almost as if it seems to have it's almost as if one crosses a threshold, enters into a kind of mythic space. What is the story there?
You know what? That's really interesting, because that's maybe the painting that I've had the least control over from the beginning, where, it's almost as if like everything in that painting was just meant to be for it. So, without kind of destroying it too much for anybody else, but from the beginning, I had this blank canvas, a blank stretch cloth, which had these extraordinary kind of deep holes and cuts, and the surface is really difficult. And I couldn't figure out what on earth to do with it. And then I was looking into these exorcisms in northern Tanzania. And I came across these stories of, so it's just on the left-hand side of this screen, with three naked women riding hyenas coming out of, floating above this large anthill.
I really love it. Yes. Yeah.
And then I came across these stories of what was being removed from the women that were going through these exorcisms. And these descriptions were of elderly, naked ladies that were on those woven baskets, or that they were on hyenas, and they would come out of these anthills at night. And sometimes you would find, you know, one of the riders would be lying flat on their back on a pile of stones, would be found the next morning. And I just thought, like, this was, at the time I was looking into this because I was thinking about the just issues around mental health, really, and wanting to, and the way that that's kind of represented in society, and the different forms that one would consider as mental health issues take on at different points in culture. And that's kind of what led me to looking at the exorcism. So then I kind of wanted to paint this painting.
Yes.
And then I saw that I had this drawing that was maybe 2 years old of an anthill. And I had this canvas that was equally old, but I'd never figured out what to do on it. And the holes in the anthill fit perfectly for the drawing, as if it was just waiting for that moment to happen.
It was waiting for that.
Yeah, so then the size of the anthill became like way too big for the painting because it was dictated by the surface and not by what I would have done. And then it just became this really awkward, weird painting for me to try and navigate. It's really simple in that it's basically sort of 5 elements and that's it. But just the scale of the anthill relative to everything made me do things that I've never repeated. And I don't know if I'd know how to repeat it because it was just that one time. So yeah, it's just a painting that was meant to happen as it is.
And I think the anthill is a lovely portal to return to Anna.
Yes.
Yeah, but thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry really for interrupting you, because it is wonderful to hear you talk to each other, and it's really been like thought-provoking and wonderful to also hear you unpack all these layers of that are both in your writing and in your paintings. Nevertheless, I would like to ask one question from the audience. I think there's one question that we have, I think, touched upon already, namely how you were able to navigate sexuality and the representation of the vulva in Kenyan society. But I think we spoke about this, or you spoke about this extensively already. But there's another question that is asking, and maybe that's a question to both of you, about the meaning of the animals themselves, whether there is a particular African myths or East African myths that are connected to these specific animals that you depict or that you describe, or whether it is more of an individual take and a more problematization of the gaze and the viewer rather than the actual myth behind the animal. So is it more about the viewer or the subject?
Michael, that's for you. I think you said it. That's completely for you, because I think we have the same point of view.
Yes. So with those, the monkeys came out of this interview that I had come across where there was like a sort of medicine man who was going to take these. Some people had come to him asking to learn how to gain more power in their lives and how to master power, and he said that in order for him to help them, he would have to put them in a trance. And then they would find out. And when asked how, he said, well, the animal that will let them know this is the eland, but he needed to go and accompany this person through this world, this trance world, because out of the bushes, an irresistible gazelle would pop out and lead them off their path, And so he would need to be there to basically slap them on the hand and say, leave the gazelle alone, we're going down this way. Otherwise, you'll never learn about power. And then I just thought, well, for the show that I was doing, which was in Hong Kong at the time, I wanted to have these irresistible characters, you know, with this kind of irresistible sexual allure, be part of the show in the same way that this guy talked about these gazelles. So they were there as distractions, but I mean, as soon as you draw a reclining monkey with a bunch of bananas or a bonobo standing in a, you know, in a bikini, it is very difficult to avoid any of the other problems that come with that. But for me, that was actually important, that these things that are visually problematic can also have a history that isn't the one that one assumes it is when looking at it. And that really is again what kind of allowed me to go there, really, because I think if I was just thinking about trying to deal with all these issues of racial stereotyping and these histories, I would never have gone down that route. You know, it's as Yvonne said earlier, you know, like it's that monkey wasn't my monkey.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you know. So,
yes. Yeah.
Well, there's a question about the soul, actually, which I think might be interesting in relation to the title of the project, Paradise Edict, and the fact that you use a lot of biblical or religious references. It is asking whether, if one paints or writes, whether one has to put one's entire soul into either the painting or the book, and whether that is actually what you're both doing with your work.
Do you want to go first?
Okay. I don't know if it is the soul as much as maybe there's an entire universe within. There's a world within, and it's a multi-sensory world, and it has multiple how do you say it, you know, lines of being, and maybe the soul is one of them. Certainly for me, I know that I'm being truthful to the text if I work from within, from the inside out, right? I don't know if one can call that the soul or the spirit or whatever it is, but it's, yeah, there's an element of an inner otherness. Yeah.
Absolutely, I have nothing else to add to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, another question maybe is here about the colonial role, or what role does the colonial history of Kenya still play in both of your literature and paintings? And I know that you, Michael, you are quite adamant about the fact of not being necessarily framed as in this post-colonial trajectory, but still I think it's an interesting question to ask, because especially from Western perspectives, your work is often has been framed in that sense, and I mean, from what I read about your work, Yvonne, I feel like you find these terms less problematic. So maybe it's also interesting to hear from both of you how you feel about this historical trajectory that your work is being understood.
You first, Mike.
Yeah, you know, like I found it incredibly problematic, particularly when I was studying, that if anyone wanted to talk about anything that was going on in East Africa, it was always defined in relationship to the colonial.
Colonial, I know.
As if that was the end point and the beginning point for anything to have value. And quite frankly, also, I was born in 1984. It was a long time after, you know, the colonials finished their time in the country. doing their things. And if you want to talk about post-colonial times, I would say you'd probably have to talk to my mother's generation, who lived that and went through that, and that is a much bigger thing. Whereas for me, if one were to ask the sort of questions that were being brought up when talking about colonialism and using colonialism as the reason for these problems or the justification for something being good or bad, I could look and see people that had nothing to do with that, you know, that I had grown up around seeing. The people who were in power were not colonials, you know, the people next to me and my family and my friends, like all of this had nothing themselves to do with colonialism in their lives. Yet there was this pressure that everything had to be described like that. And I didn't feel like, because the colonials were there, it doesn't mean that the rest of culture didn't happen, you know, that all of these other cultures that existed didn't have their own narratives and reasons and aspect of looking at things. And so for me, it was really important for the focus to be on the lives of the people that I was interested in, which, you know, weren't the colonial lives, because that wasn't the life that I'm living. And those aren't the people that I knew and know. So for me, it's just a way of dismissing what's there, and, you know, and also not taking responsibility for what's there.
Yeah, my position is perhaps a little different from Michael's, only in that I consider the what we call the I don't know, the colonial period merely as you know, one of the strands of a very long, vast, and deep both Kenyan and continental history. I'm interested in the excavation of histories, but also the histories that you know, you go to Pate Island and the histories of 1,000 years are still there, omnipresent. And I think I've come of an age, I'm not interested in centering or paying attention, too much attention to this, yes, it was brutal and vicious and nasty season of encounter with a culture that should have known better when they entered into other people's lives. But it's not the be all or the end all of the long, big, grand trajectory of African beingness, of discovery, of naming, of languaging. Yeah.
I think if colonialism was talked about in that respect, I wouldn't have a single problem with it. But, you know, I think that's beautifully put.
Well, I guess, I mean, in a way, it is also that the gift of a younger generation to be able to face history in a new form. And I guess, Michael, you do this in a way, in a very inventive and well, you have a very strong vision for the future with the institute you are trying to build up, and that is actually
yes.
One of the main goals is the kind of redefinition of art history of that region from within, in a way, and I feel that is a big contribution to that entire discussion, to actually own this art history writing, or to write these narratives from within again. And in a way, maybe it needed a new generation to make this happen in a way. But I mean, maybe it's interesting for the audience to hear a little bit about, and as also parts of the exhibition will be traveling to Nairobi, to hear about your vision with the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Anna. Yeah, so Nkai Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute was established at the beginning of last year. And our remit, which is quite a simple one, is to help with the growth of contemporary art in East Africa, and that takes on many different forms. And I came to kind of thinking about wanting an institute like this to exist through talking to different generations and talking to other artists, and just asking, you know, like, what is the one thing that we're missing? And the first time I thought, like, whoa, hang on a sec, we really have a problem, wasn't from the respect of showing, it was from talking to a younger generation who were just finished studying. They had all done their bachelors, and there wasn't a single one of the artists that could name someone that showed before 2005. You know, that there was a very distinct cutoff point. And for me, I just thought, like, given that we're talking about culture, and culture is about others and about our histories, I don't even know how you go about making a painting where you don't have a context and you don't have an artistic context in which to work. And so for me, it became important to try and help in some way be part of presenting the stories that already exist and presenting the work of artists that aren't seen from the older generations for one reason or another. Usually it's because they're commercially not doing as well as artists of a younger generation, but present their work in a way that would be true to them and to their story. Then there are other aspects about Nkai that we're going to develop. And as it's an institute, we want to bring in an educational aspect. So within the next sort of 5 years, we're hoping to set up a postgraduate diploma, which will be a fine art postgraduate diploma. And alongside what we're doing with the exhibition space, we're taking on a library and developing that, an art library. The other part will be children and trying to involve children in the institute as much as possible, through schools visiting, through artist workshop with children, and just allowing art to have a place within culture, because at the moment the place is minimal, if at all. And for me, there is a place which is unique about looking at painting, looking at sculpture, looking at an installation, any form of art where
Michael? Yeah, I think we've
it's
lost. Maybe
with
he's
the
coming
part
back.
of you to reflect on that way, for me, is important, and it's a fundamental aspect of my life. Did I get stuck in the waves?
Yes, the very last bit was stuck. But I think thank you
Okay.
very much for
yeah.
expanding on these ideas, and it's wonderful to have this kind of perspective, this outlook, and we all look forward to coming to Nairobi to visit your institute, hopefully soon. Well, I guess as the time has progressed already quite a bit, I think it is my duty, I think, to close the Q&A session now. But thank you both immensely for taking the time and sharing your thoughts so openly with us and the audience. Very, very exciting, and I look forward to continuing that dialogue soon, and hopefully soon again in physical form.
In physical form, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Hauste Kunst, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Michael. I mean, I know we were just starting, we're just warming up, but yeah.
Exactly.
So many questions, but anyway,
Yeah.
well, I hope we get to meet you anyway here. Yeah.
Absolutely, and thank you, Yvonne, you know, so much for, as I said, for being up for this and being part of this. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and to Anna, Andrea, and everyone at Hauste Kunst, and all of you who've turned up to listen to us natter. You know, thank you so much for coming and being part of this.
I can speak 1 second, and thank you again. You left us with images of creation, the image you feel, and the image that challenged you, and that image becomes something. There were other questions about how do you end that image? Where will you stop, and when this question, when this image becomes what is its ending point, be a story or be a painting? I will suggest we are not gonna answer now. We keep it suspended for various reasons. The first reason is that the show is going to travel. And as Anna said, it's going to be in London at the Royal Academy in spring, and then eventually at NCAI in Nairobi. And we're very looking forward for those 2 new installments of the show. I am also here to share with our audiences that if you want to experience a guided tour on Saturday, this Saturday, there will be one in German at 6 p.m. Set, and one on the 30 in English at 6 p.m. again on the 30. Last but not least, there's a beautiful catalog that was edited by Anna Schneider. It's available online on the House of Kunst website. I think I said almost everything. I just have to thank the audience as well, the few that remain. Thank you for being with us, and thank you. We are very looking forward to welcome you back at the House of Kunst or in London and in Nairobi. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you soon.